If any database systems can be described as classic, it's these ones, the Relational Database Management Systems, or RDBMS, that we've been focusing on in this course. They all share the key features discussed. They're made of tables with defined columns, multiple rows of data, primary keys and foreign keys, and they support relationships, transactions, and the ACID test, and using SQL to talk to them. The most obvious in this category are Oracle, IBM's DB2, Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, but there are several others that can be mentioned in the same breath. SQLite, Sybase, Teradata. Microsoft Access uses these ideas, as does PostgreSQL, although technically speaking, PostgreSQL adds a few extra features, so it's formally known as an ORDBMS, an Object Relational Database Management System. Now, of course, these systems aren't identical. There are differences between them. There's differences in features, differences in implementation and hardware requirements and expense. But it is the similarities we're interested in here. And these are all based on ideas developed by a gentleman by the name of Edgar Codd back in the 1970s, and the products themselves have been around nearly as long. Oracle was first released in 1979, and the first relational database that I used was DB2, and that was in 1983. Now, you'll sometimes hear the phrase enterprise level used to refer to these database systems. Now, enterprise level has no strict definition. It's really more of a buzzword to refer to large organizations or government departments with at least hundreds, but often thousands or tens of thousands of users. And it's not so much that strict number of users is important, just that by the time you get to that level, your demands are more stringent. You need constant uptime, disaster recovery, continual backup, and these systems will provide that and more. Now, they might sound like one app, one product, but you don't just casually install Oracle or install SQL Server. The relational database management systems are often split up into a family of different applications. So you'd first install the database engine, typically on a shared server or using several servers, and it just runs continually in the background but might have no graphical user interface at all. You'd either use a command line to interact with it or install a separate application just for database administration, things like SQL Server Management Studio for Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle SQL Developer, MySQL Workbench. There are many others. And sometimes you'll need a separate application to work with backup, another application to monitor and report on the database, and so on. Now, beyond that, they have multiple versions or editions available of these. Often there's at least a standard edition and also an enterprise edition with extra features for very large-scale deployments. But typically, none of them provide any application targeted at the end user, and you need to build that yourself. Now, the larger and more complex your databases get, the more time they take to maintain, and the more likely that you'll need a formal database administrator or DBA. In large organizations, you may have multiple employees whose full-time job is simply to maintain the database management system and the databases inside it. So, is it backed up? Do we have enough storage for the next week or month or year? Is it responding quickly enough? Is the design of the database as efficient as it could be? Does anything need to be purged from it? Do we have the right tables, columns, keys, and relationships? And very importantly, do we have the right indexes? As you might imagine, being a good database administrator requires not just a good general knowledge of database design, but the specifics of the particular database management system you're using. Now, one obvious difference also is that some of these are purely commercial products while others are open source. I'm sometimes asked, okay, if I can buy Microsoft Access for a couple of $100, how much is Oracle or how much is DB2? And that's not a simple answer. Most of these database systems can be licensed multiple ways, on a per-user basis, or by how many machines, or rather CPUs, they're running on, or by which edition you buy, or by what extra features you need or don't need. And we're not covering that at all. However, if we're talking about licensing, one thing that is worth mentioning is the growth in recent years of hosted cloud-based database system providers, like Microsoft Windows Azure, which does provide an option for creating hosted SQL Server database servers. You simply choose the size of the database you want and the number of databases you're having, and it'll give you a price for this. In a similar fashion, there's also the Amazon Relational Database Service, Amazon RDS, and this one gives you an option of using MySQL, Oracle, or SQL Server with different prices and options for each. Now, you still have to design the database and build the applications that use it, but you can pay them to take care of the technical infrastructure. Now, know that even the open source database systems like MySQL are not always free. MySQL is owned by Oracle now, and while the database engine is free to download and use, there is an enterprise edition that includes separate applications for backup and monitoring, and that is a commercial product. However, on the flip side of that, even the commercial database vendors also provide a free edition. This is typically restricted, although what you'd call restricted is still usually much more powerful than a desktop database. The constraints are often a reduction in size. Perhaps the database can't be larger than 4 gigabytes, or the database engine might only use one CPU even when installed in a multi-CPU machine. And when you're looking for the free edition of any commercial database management system, look for the word Express. So there's a SQL Server Express edition from Microsoft. Oracle also have an Express edition, which is free. DB2 has an Express edition, although strangely that's not free, but there is an Express-C or Express-C version that is free. And these are often very useful in the learning process, as they are convenient enough to just install on your own machine for experimentation. But while relational database management systems are the most widely used with the longest history, they aren't necessarily always the best option. So let's take a look at a couple of other database types.